North Korea has threatened to end the decades-long ceasefire with its southern neighbour if it goes ahead with its joint military drills with the US. Pyongyang also cited the US-led attempts to slap it with sanctions as being behind this decision. It comes as Washington is eyeing up more punishment for North Korea, described as some of the toughest ever imposed by the UN. A resolution is expected to be passed later this week. Well, for more on renewed tensions on the Korean Peninsula, I'm joined by Glyn Ford. He's an expert on East Asia. He's also an MEP. Glyn, it's not the first threat of this kind we've heard coming from North Korea, but do you think with this military exercise and, of course, the threat of these new sanctions could actually provoke North Korea into pursuing that war that hasn't actually stopped? It's still ongoing.
Well, the answer at the moment is no. I mean, there's a difference between if you want to remove, saying you no longer recognise an armistice and actually starting shooting again. They're not quite the same thing. But clearly, North Korea feels under pressure at the moment from the UN Security Council. It looks like you're going to have a joint US-China resolution that's going to be very critical of North Korea, impose new sanctions, at least in theory, if not in practice, against the regime, and they're responding.
Significant, isn't it, that China's actually cooperating with the US over this?
Well, I was in Beijing quite recently, and the Chinese government is genuinely annoyed with North Korea, with this, particularly with the third nuclear test, because it's giving an excuse to the United States and Japan to deploy theater missile defense, which not only threatens North Korea but threatens China, and at the same time gives the new, much more nationalistic incoming government in Japan an excuse for removing Article 9 from the Constitution through a referendum and actually remilitarizing to a degree Japan, where clearly those troops are not, and Army and Navy and Air Force are not just for North Korea, but also are there available with the boundary disputes we have in the region.
Let's talk about these new sanctions which are being drafted at the moment and expected to go ahead with the UN Security Council. Susan Rice, she says that she's the America's UN representative. She says that this will indeed have an impact on ending North Korea's nuclear ambitions. But will they?
Well, actually, it rather depends on China and Russia, because you can actually impose effective sanctions by sea with the Proliferation Security Initiative that the United States has actually launched. The problem is the land boundaries, and there are two land boundaries that North Korea has, one with China and one with Russia. All the evidence is, up until now, I mean, Pyongyang's never had it so good. I mean, if you've got the money in Pyongyang, you can buy almost anything. And certainly the view in the region is there's a fairly large amount of sophisticated Russian military technology also available to the North Koreans. So will Russia and will China actually close that border after they voted for the sanctions, or will they merely, if you want, think job done?
What about the chances of North Korea launching another nuclear weapon as a test? What could be the consequences then?
Well, I think things will just get worse. My own view, frankly, is that Kim Jong-un has demonstrated his strength to the military, are very important in North Korea through the satellite launch in December and the nuclear test last month. I think he's more likely to be turning away once we get through the next month or so towards looking at economic modernization rather than repeating the missile and the nuclear tests. I can be wrong, of course. It's very difficult to read North Korea, but it seems to me that that's where the thinking is. And frankly, they probably don't have the capacity to do either of those things in the very near future. You've seen considerable periods of time between satellite launches and between nuclear tests. I don't think they're there on the table ready to use now.
Just briefly, Glyn, a lot of talk about taking military action against Iran over its perceived nuclear ambitions. We don't hear similar rhetoric towards North Korea, a military campaign, do we?
Well, I mean, I think people are rather concerned about what the consequences might be. We saw the consequences of the last attempt at regime change on the Korean Peninsula, which was the Korean War, which killed millions. And of course, there's China there. I mean, China, whatever it thinks of North Korea, actually prefers North Korea rather than the Americans up on the Yellow River.
Glyn, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Glyn Ford there, former member of the European Parliament and also an expert on East Asia. Thanks for joining us live here on RT.